Greetings all. Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra, verse 109. So this is the penultimate verse in our section on contemplative practices, practices that involve contemplating some aspect of view, that is to say, some aspect of the nature of reality, which traditionally is called darshana, view or viewpoint on reality, right? So philosophy, it's sometimes translated, but more accurately, these are darshana contemplations, contemplations of the viewpoint on reality had by an awakened one in order to cultivate your capacity to awaken. Now, just to be very clear about that, if you read a view statement, such as the view statements enumerated in these verses of the Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra, and you simply believe in the concept, or understand, first you need to understand it, and then believe in the concept or teaching given in that verse, then that's not actually a spiritual practice, that's a religious practice, to believe what is given to you as truth by a religious text. The spiritual practice, of course, is to look where the words are pointing and see if you can access a direct experience of what those words are pointing to or alluding to. And part of how you know that you have successfully done so is that you see how the words, however well phrased or well chosen, are inadequate to describe that which they are pointing to, right? So, in other words, this would be maybe even a better way to put it. You can read a teaching, a spiritual teaching, contemplate it, and like, oh yeah, I get it. And then when you have a direct experience of that, which is not sort of prompted or cued or primed by the belief, then it's different, because when you have the direct experience and then come back to the verse that describes that experience or that mode of experiencing or that way of seeing or being, then you tend to go, oh, now I get it. And one of my professors in university who taught mysticism, he said, that is the most basic type of mystical experience. Simply the, oh, now I get it. And what's important is that you did get it before intellectually, right? You understood what the proposition was in the verse or passage about the nature of reality. But understanding is not direct perception. So as another one of my teachers compared the difference to that between a blueprint for a house and a house. Meaning to say, you need a blueprint to build a house, and the blueprint shows the plan of the house and where you're going to put the doors and windows and what the dimensions are going to be. But you can't live in a blueprint, right? And it's the very proposition is absurd. And in the same way, this teacher explained, if you mistake belief in or understanding of a spiritual teaching for the direct experience of it, you've made a mistake as egregious as believing that you could live in the blueprint of a house as opposed to building the house and living in it, right? So the point here being, understanding is just a kind of prerequisite, right? And you know you're going beyond conceptual understanding when you have this aha moment, and there could be successive, even deeper aha moments, where again you go, oh, now I get it, now I get it on a deeper level. And here's kind of the crucial test in a way, that if you go to try to explain it to someone, they will say, as they have said to me, oh, that's just what you were saying before. And you're like, well, okay, maybe it was what I was saying before, but now I get it, you see? But the words are going to sound much the same. kind of conceptual understanding and experiential understanding don't necessarily give rise to specifically different words, other than the fact that once you have experiential understanding, you will find new ways to phrase and rephrase that insight. There's endlessly new ways, actually, which is the fact which allows people like me to make a living, right? Literally, there wasn't endlessly new ways to rephrase the same insights. Teachers of this material would be out of work in fairly short order. Okay, so let's come to the verse itself. Oh, and by the way, happy new moon. Well, you might be seeing this video any time in the far or near future, but I'm recording the video on the new moon in mid-September. Okay, here's the verse. Sarvajñaḥ sarva-kartā ca vyāpakaḥ parameśvaraḥ sa evāhaṃ śaiva-dharmā iti dārḍhyād bhavec Shiva. The highest divinity is omniscient, omnipotent, and all-pervading, and I am he who possesses Shiva's qualities. Stabilizing this conviction, one becomes Shiva. So this is an interesting verse, right? If you contemplate, the verse suggests, if you contemplate the qualities attributed to God, then realize the same qualities in yourself, then you'll realize you are God. Now, on the face of it, this is very, very different sort of proposition from that given by most Western monotheistic religions, right, which are usually rigorously dualistic, meaning they posit a distinction between the practitioner or adherent of the religion and the God which he or she worships, right? So obviously this is a non-dual context, and yet it's still kind of, for some, a bit startling to have it stated so plainly, as it were. So let's break it down. The subject of the first line is parameśvaraḥ. Parameśvaraḥ, the highest divinity, or the Supreme Lord, if you prefer. It's just a kind of term that means God, but God in the highest, not God in the kind of more mythological ways in which people conceptualize some version of a supreme being, but parameśvaraḥ, divinity in its highest version, right? So for this tradition, that generally refers to unbounded, unlimited, timeless, trans-individual consciousness. That's a sort of quick definition of what we mean by God. And Abhinavagupta gives a more precise definition of what non-dual tantrikas mean by God in chapter 1 of Tantra Sada, a quote I recently posted in the Facebook group. But that's good enough just to say that for non-dualists anyway, it's unbounded, unlimited, timeless, autonomous, and trans-individual consciousness. That's what we mean by God. Trans-individual meaning that it underlies the consciousness, or manifests as the consciousness of all conscious beings, right? And therefore it doesn't belong to a person. So unlike the conception of God in other religions, where where the mind of God or the consciousness of God belongs to a superhuman entity, which in some sense stands apart from his creation. And here, not. By the way, Shaivism, and Tantra generally does not deny that there are superhuman entities or supernatural beings or non-corporeal beings. Doesn't deny that in the slightest. In fact, the general assumption is that that is the case, that there are countless types of beings, including superhuman, supernatural ones. But that's not what we mean by God. That's not what we mean by parameśvaraḥ, the highest divinity, or the supreme Lord, supreme being, if you will. So, trans-individual consciousness is one way to sort of try to point towards that. But anyway, it's also important to note that the tradition is inheriting language from an earlier dualistic mode. In other words, the religion of Shaivism, the religion that venerates Shiva, the deity Shiva as the supreme being, was, like most religions, originally a dualistic religion, right? That said there's a difference between Shiva and you and the world, right? There's three main things going on, they said. But by practicing, you can become equal to God. You can become equal to the supreme being Shiva or Rudra. Now that's the early pre-tantric days of Shaivism, right? So like 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th century, that era especially. And so the tantric tradition, which by the way has both non-dual and dualistic branches, but the tantric tradition as a whole inherits this earlier language, just like tantric Buddhism inherits earlier Buddhist language, and has to deal with that whether they like it or not. The tantric Shaivism inherits earlier dualistic language from the pre-tantric phase of Shaivism, and this language is seen here. That there's a kind of implying there's a kind of supreme being that is omniscient, omnipotent, and somehow all-pervading. So how are we to understand this in this non-dual mode? Because right in the next line it says sa evāhaṃ, right, which is just an extended form of saying soham, by the way. Many people are familiar with the mantra soham, I am that, or I am he. So that is literally how you would say that phrase in Sanskrit discourse. Like if somebody said, "Are you Bob?" you would say, if you're speaking Sanskrit, soham, I'm he. So that's just the meaning of the phrase. It's used as a mantra. I am that, because it's translated I am that simply because the word ham or aham can be used to refer to a male or any principle that happens to be grammatically masculine. So again, people who speak, French and Spanish and German understand this, and English speakers generally don't. But that kind of ambiguity between I am that and I am he is embedded in the language. Are you saying I am that masculine principle, not masculine principle? See, that's exactly how we get screwed up, English speakers. I am that principle, that tattva, which happens to be grammatically masculine. You have to say I am he, just like, okay, since I'm trying to explain this, I might as well finish the job. Look, like in Spanish, the word for body is cuerpo, el cuerpo. The body is a masculine noun. So if somebody, was asked, how is your body feeling? Then in Spanish you would say, it hurts, but the language is the same as saying he hurts, because the noun is a masculine gender noun. So even if you're a woman, do you see, this is again something English speakers don't quite grasp, but even if you're a woman, you say he hurts. when you refer to your body, because the word body is grammatically masculine. It has nothing to do with implying that you are a masculine type of woman, you know? So in the same way, soham can mean I am he, meaning a masculine figure like Shiva in this case, or Krishna, let's say, or I am that principle which happens to have a masculine gender grammatically speaking. Okay, so soham, longer form of the same expression, is sa evāhaṃ, which just gives extra emphasis. I am he. Okay, and then we get the phrase śaiva-dharmā. I am he whose qualities, dharma here means is qualities, are Shiva. I am he whose qualities are Shiva. Well, that means Shiva's, the qualities of Shiva. I am he whose qualities are Shiva's qualities. You could almost read it as having a double meaning, though, because dharma can also mean religion or tradition. And so śaiva-dharmā specifically means the religions or religious traditions associated with Shiva. So if you say sa evāhaṃ śaiva-dharmāḥ, that could be taken to mean I am one who follows the different paths and traditions associated with Shiva, or, as in this case, I am one whose qualities are Shiva's. So that's a kind of ambiguity in the Sanskrit, resolved by context, though, here. We can be clear on the meaning. Okay, so just breaking down the grammar, as I like to do for you guys. Then it says, iti dārḍhyād bhavec chivaḥ. So bhavec Shiva, after sandhi, which is a grammatical change in Sanskrit, becomes bhavec chivaḥ, but Shiva is Shiva. Okay, so you must work to stabilize this conviction. This is this important word, dārḍhyād. Dārḍhyād. You must stabilize this conviction, really fix it in place deeply seat it. You know, like we say, oh, that really landed for me when you get something, right? Landed, and then, but you not only need to let it land, but let it stabilize. Dārḍhyād, really stabilize this understanding. Then, and only then, you become Shiva. That's just a figure of speech because you always already were God. But you become God is a figure of speech to mean you realize your identity. You realize your true nature. Okay, so let's recap the whole verse. Not ready to recap the whole verse because I didn't explain how we interpret the first words in this non-dual mode. Sarvajñaḥ, omniscient. Okay, if you realize that you are Shiva, does that mean you know everything in the entire universe? Of course, you already know that that's an absurd proposition, right? Realizing that you are Shiva, that you are God, doesn't mean you suddenly know the nickel content of the crust of the planet Venus. It doesn't suddenly mean that you know how many leaves are on every tree, right? So what does it mean? Because presumably our authors, the original masters, were not so naive or foolish to posit such a thing, right? So on the basis of the recognition sutras by Kshemaraja, I argue that the correct understanding of sarvajñaḥ, omniscient, it actually means you know whatever you need to know exactly when you need to know it, and what's more, you know that. meaning to say, you know that you know whatever you need to know. And so you're functionally omniscient. You know whatever you need to know, and you know that's true. You know it. You know that you know whatever you need to know, and that you don't need to know whatever you don't know. So you feel this completeness of knowledge. We're talking about the awakened condition, right? The fully awakened or liberated state includes this completeness of knowledge, whereby it doesn't mean you know all the facts possible to know, but you know all that you need to know, and you know that that is true. And by the same token, then, sarva-kartā means you can do whatever you need to do exactly when it needs to be done. And if you can't do something, then that's all the proof needed that you don't need to. Right? So this is a state of liberation in which you feel your conviction, the conviction of that. You know it to be true prior to thought, prior to belief or conceptualization. It's a kind of what you might call a deep trust that you can do whatever you need to do in any given moment. And if there's something you can't do, then that does not need to be done, at least not by you. So there's this peace and this trust as a result. As for all pervasive, well, that's easy. You literally experience, when you experience your nature as pure consciousness or trans-individual awareness, you experience your all-pervasiveness, meaning to say you experience that what you are is equally present everywhere, because everything is consciousness, right? Now, so that's just obvious to somebody who's had the experience, and it's obviously nonsense to anyone who hasn't, which is fine. Okay, so now we can recap. Sarvajñaḥ sarva-kartā ca vyāpakaḥ parameśvaraḥ sa evāhaṃ śaiva-dharmā iti dārḍhyād bhavec chivaḥ. The highest divinity is omniscient, omnipotent, and all-pervading, and I am He who possesses Shiva's qualities. Of course, you can say, I am she who possesses those divine qualities as well. Stabilizing this conviction, one becomes Shiva. Okay, so this verse, in reply to a comment in the live feed, this verse is not actually an example of gender bias. There are plenty of examples of gender bias in the tradition, but this is not one of them. This is just a simple matter of a convention whereby, just like, all authors prior to whatever 20, 30 years ago, all authors writing in English would just use he as the default third-person pronoun. They wouldn't bother to say he or she. Some people did, but by and large, almost nobody. So this is, but you'd have to know Sanskrit grammar, and I'm not gonna, get into it more now. That there are examples of gender bias in the tradition. This verse is not actually one of them. But having said that, soham as a mantra is rather more frequently used in Vedantic circles, where the hum in question is actually neuter. The sa in question is agreeing with the neuter principle, Brahman, and in Shaiva circles in general, soham is also used, but hamsa is used more often. And nobody ever said this. I never saw any scripture saying this, but it seems to me not a coincidence, probably, that if you say hamsa continuously, kind of in a loop, hamsa, 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 hum, then you're also saying I am she, because sa-hum means I am she in Sanskrit. And hamsa means it's a word for the soul or the vital essence or the principle of life. So the hamsa mantra, when kind of repeated continuously, kind of can you're like, am I saying hamsa or am I saying sa-hum, which means I am she. We would be referring to the goddess, of course. So perhaps it's just a coincidence, or perhaps this is part of why these tantric traditions prefer, when they're going for disyllabic mantras, they prefer the mantra hamsa to so-hum. But neither mean I am. So-hum means I am that or I am he. It doesn't just mean I am. If you want to just say I am, that's just aham. And that is discussed in the Recognition Sutras, chapter 20. Okay, that is it for this verse, 109. I don't imagine that this is the sort of practice that is advisable for a beginner on the path, right? Which might just cause them to develop some strange delusions of grandeur, right? And as one of my teachers said, look, the danger in saying I am God is that it's your ego speaking, right? The ego seeks its own deification, right? That's the best possible news for the ego. You mean I am the most important thing in the universe, right? So that's just a kind of license to become a narcissist, right? So that's the problem, is that I am God. That's why I am God or you are God is maybe just a bad translation, as opposed to saying something like your true nature, what you truly are, is always already perfectly divine. Which takes more words than saying you are God, but it's also a more accurate pointer, right? So contemplate that, please. And this practice, I'm not going to advise that you take up this particular practice in verse 109 unless, you can really kind of leverage it in a way that doesn't deify the ego, which is not an easy task. Om. Thank you to everyone, especially the patrons on Patreon, whose generous support allows us to continue doing the free Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra course, now in its 3rd year, and it is the most comprehensive, detailed course on this sacred text, this liberating sacred text in the world, at least in the English-speaking world. So thank you patrons for making that possible, and we will see you next time.